Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, Bill Cannon, retired NYPD sergeant with almost 27 years of service. Folks, thank you so much for being followers and subscribers of Police Off the Cuff on YouTube. If you're not a subscriber, please go to our YouTube, hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and ring that bell. And if you'd like to help support us, you can go on our Patreon. We thank all our Patreon supporters. Of course, all our channel members. Thank you guys so much. You can see our channel members delineated by the green font in the chat. So, folks, this is day number 6 of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So far, 350 civilians have been killed. It's an international crisis. And look, the Ukrainian people are a tough people. They're not laying down to Russia. And they're going to continue to fight. There was supposed to be peace negotiations today in Belarus. But who was Russia sending to these peace negotiations? Clearly, when they've invaded a country, how serious are they about wanting peace? There he is up on the screen, Putin and some of his alleged peaceniks there. One of the things we need to know, what's behind the Ukrainian crisis, and basically it goes back to when after the Soviet Union collapsed, NATO expanded eastward and eventually took up most of the European nations that had been in the communist sphere. The Baltic republics of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, which were once part of the Soviet Union, joined NATO, as did Poland, Romania, and others. As a result, NATO moved hundreds of miles closer to Moscow, directly bordering Russia. And in 2008, it stated that it planned someday to enroll Ukraine, though that is still seen as a far-off prospect. So obviously, Putin is threatened by this. He described the Soviet disintegration as a catastrophe that robbed Russia of its rightful place among the world's great powers and put it at the mercy of he describes them as a predatory West. He spent his 22 years in power rebuilding Russia's military and reasserting its geopolitical clout. The Russian president calls NATO's expansion menacing, and the prospect of Ukraine joining it a major threat to his country. As Russia has grown more assertive and stronger militarily, his complaints about NATO have grown more strident. He has repeatedly invoked the specter of American ballistic missiles and combat forces in Ukraine, though U.S., Ukrainian, NATO officials insist there are none. So this is quite a serious. He even put his nuclear power plan, put them on alert. So the folks that were involved in that put them on alert, as if you're going to use a nuclear weapon in this instance. That's pretty scary that someone could even threaten that. Nuclear weapons, basically the use of, will wind up in the disintegration of the entire world. And the fact that he's talking about using nuclear weapons in this military incurgency is really a little bit disturbing. I find it a lot disturbing. And at this point, I don't think Putin is looking good in regards to the world stage. Let's hear what he has to say here. I mean, obviously, we're not going to understand what he says. He's speaking in Russian.
By ordering his army to put nuclear forces on high alert. Western countries aren't only taking unfriendly actions against our country in the economic sphere, he said, but top officials from leading NATO members made aggressive statements regarding our country. Amid Putin's threats, ordinary Russians are trying to speak out against the war their leader has waged, often at their own personal risk, as over 3,000 people have been detained during protests since Thursday.
I'm sorry, I'm so shocked. I just can't help crying.
Crippling sanctions imposed on Russian financial institutions already sowed panic here. On Sunday, banks targeted by US and EU have been working overtime to service long lines of people trying to withdraw their life savings.
So, Mary, we have heard about protests. What kind of resistance are you seeing from Russians in Moscow?
Well, yesterday people in Moscow tried to gather for a demo, but there was so much police on the streets that they basically cut the meeting before it happened. You know, across other cities, there were protests in St. Petersburg. There was a pretty big crowd. Overall, about 4,000 people have been detained so far since Thursday. But obviously, people are trying to speak out against this war, but it's becoming increasingly difficult. We heard a pretty menacing statement from the prosecutor general last night, who said that, if you try to help Ukraine in any way, or if you try to sort of do anything that is in favor of Ukraine, that might be considered treason, and that could potentially end you up in jail for 20 years. So it's increasingly hard for Russians who are against this war to say that they are.
Mary, I'm wondering just if Russians are feeling the impact of these sanctions. I know it might be too soon. I've seen some reports that indicate that there's maybe a run on money, that people are trying to take their money out of the banks, and that's the kind of biggest thing they're feeling right now. But are they feeling any sort of hit from the sanctions yet?
Yeah, I think people here are generally very unnerved. Every day there's new sanctions. Every day there's something going on that potentially will change their usual way of life that they're used to. Like I said, not being able to get out of this country, not being able to buy things that they're used to. Today we had the historic low. The ruble hit historic lows today, and it still doesn't seem that it's hit the bottom, because the Moscow Stock Exchange today actually decided not to open the trading because they're so afraid of what's going to happen once they do. The Russian government also asked their companies, the main sort of cash earners for the Russian government, to sell whatever they earn in foreign currency, buy rubles to sort of prop up the currency. So it's definitely, people are preparing and bracing for possibly the worst.
So, folks, this is a very much an unpopular war, not only in Russia and in the Ukraine and in Europe, but Europeans are legitimately very nervous about this, because this guy Putin is no joke. He's a former KGB. He's been in power now, and his vision is the old Russia, not the Russia where they lost the Ukraine, not where they lost other parts of their country. So this is very scary. What they say Putin wants, he wants Russia brought back to the days again before the Russian collapse. He wants the clock turn back like 30 years, establishing a broad Russian-dominated security zone resembling the power Moscow yielded in Soviet days. Putin's 69 years old, and this is probably the twilight of his career. Russia presented NATO and the United States in December with a set of written demands that it said were needed to ensure its security. Foremost among them are a guarantee that Ukraine would never join NATO, that NATO draw down its forces. And the Eastern European countries have also joined in. The 2015 ceasefire in Ukraine be implemented through Moscow and Kyiv disagree sharply on what that would mean. So there's obviously, they were talking about peace talks today in Belarus. However, how do you have peace talks amidst you invading a country? How can you talk about peace? Very difficult to talk peace when you're shelling civilians, when you're killing civilians. It just doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense. Let's hear this from
helping other people with her at the border and trying to calm them down and offering her cars so they can keep warm. Together, they plan to carry on to Latvia and then perhaps to England, just far enough away from the war.
That report filed by DW correspondent Max Sander, who is now standing by at the Polish-Ukrainian border. Max, what's the situation with refugees where you are right now?
Right, Gerhard, it's a very busy morning here at the train station in Przemysl, a border town close to the Polish-Ukrainian border. This is the train station here, which would be the first point of entry for many of the refugees coming from Ukraine, crossing from Lviv to Poland. And a lot of these people who are here today have been on the road for multiple days. So they were in a very exhausted state here, but people are here actually providing some assistance. You can see there are volunteers here providing food and other items, and also people are here helping with further transportation to get people on the road to their next locations where they're going to.
Max, you've spoken to a lot of people who have just crossed the border. What are they telling you?
Right, so the situation on the other side of the border is still very, very difficult. If you look at the car crossings, we're looking at 20 to 30 kilometers of traffic jams, people who are trying to cross the border by car. The train service between Ukraine and Poland is also on a very irregular basis, so people are really on the move. We're hearing that as many as 250,000 people are on the road from Lviv to Poland here at the moment, and there are major holdups. People are camping out, spending the nights out in the cold with insufficient, with lack of water, lack of food, and just trying to make it. And from what we're hearing, the situation is becoming a bit worse over the last hours and days, because people really spend days on the road now, and there is also situations where people have told us that there's a panic and some sort of altercations at the border on the Ukrainian side.
But procedures have been put in place to make crossing that border easier for Ukrainians. Are they being offered help to travel onwards?
Right. So the Polish authorities at the moment are not actually asking for any sort of documentation. That's what we're hearing. So you don't need a passport. They're letting anybody in on the Polish side. On the Ukrainian side, they're keeping men in of fighting age between 18 and 60 to serve in the military. But you can actually go to Poland, and people are not really being registered here at the moment. The Polish government has said they'll take as many in as they can. As of now, we're looking at a number of roughly 250,000 people. As I said, another 250,000 probably on the road here. But there is a system in place, and it's largely based on volunteers, but also on the municipality. The fire brigade is here, the military reserve is here, and they're trying to organize buses to bring people to other parts of Poland and even to other parts of Europe. And the embassies are also on the scene in some of the refugee shelters that we've been to. We've seen representatives from the embassies of Pakistan, for example, or from Angola and other nations that are trying to bring their citizens home.
You know, folks, I'm seeing in the chat, a lot of people are talking about how even Russian soldiers, young Russian soldiers, they want no part of this. They want no part of this invasion. This is their leader taking upon himself, like a dictator, which Putin is, to invade this country. And it's not sanctioned by the civilians or the government. Mickey Mantle, the Russian forces are using the Chernobyl nuclear site to launch continuous artillery strikes, knowing full well there can't be a counterstrike. Well, I'm sure that the Ukrainians are outgunned, outmanned. However, perhaps with the help of the United States and some of the other allies, the European countries, they can be supplied at least with weaponry, ammunition, and things like that, so they can keep the fight going. Right now, it's really a scary situation. You got to realize Ukraine is not a member of NATO, and I think that's one of the things that Putin wants to make sure of, that they are not considered to be recruited into NATO by the United States. What is the United States doing in contributing to helping Ukraine? What they're contributing now is they're sending them anti-tank and anti-aircraft weapons. They increased the American military presence in NATO countries that border Russia, and they put 8,500 troops on high alert for deployment to Eastern Europe. Administration officials also warned that the United States could throw its weight behind a Ukrainian insurgency should Russia invade Ukraine, which is what they're doing. One of the biggest problems, of course, is civilian casualties. And when you look at civilians being attacked by an army that have nothing to do with fighting this war, there you can see there's a big smoke cloud there of some Russian missiles going into residential areas. Really horrendous. They were planning to sit down for negotiations today in Belarus, and I think that could be a sort of a smokescreen, because if Russia was serious about negotiations, why would they have invaded the Ukraine to begin with? Um, it's Lorna McKenzie, good to see you. A Russian mother received a text from her son in Ukraine telling her they had been told they were liberating Ukraine, but realized they had been lied to. Yeah, I mean, how is they liberating it? They're trying to take it over. It's just a crazy thing. They're not liberating anything, and there's been protests, not just in Russia and parts of Europe, but also in the United States. This is obviously a very unpopular war, if you even call it a war. The invasion has lasted 6 days so far. There's been 6 days of this invasion. Look at these
It is
protests that are
backyard.
going on.
They are our neighbors, our brothers, our cousins, our co-workers.
Putin is bombing my country, which is Ukraine. He's killing people, killing children.
I wish I could do more, but coming here and showing our solidarity, showing that we really want the people of Ukraine to be safe.
The attack on Ukraine is an attack on us, on all our ideals, just like the Ukrainians have been telling us for the past 8 years.
Such support for Ukraine was also found in cities as varied as Paris, Erbil in Kurdish Iraq, Santiago, Chile, and the Lithuanian capital, Vilnius, where expat Belarusians protested their country's support for the invasion, also without police interference. But back inside Russia, in Yekaterinburg, east of the Ural Mountains, the voices of protest quickly muffled.
Well, up until last week, we thought it's carnival season right now. And one of the highlights in Germany is the traditional Rose Monday parade in the...
So, folks, you hear that protests all over. Russians do not agree with this invasion of Ukraine. Obviously, the Ukrainians, 350 civilians have been killed by Russian armed forces so far. We spoke about yesterday how, on the last show we did on this, how the Russian president, he got this reputation as a badass because when the U.S. asked him if he would like to flee the country, he said, "I don't need a ride, I need ammunition." And that's a badass leader. When you talk about I think it was Karzai from Afghanistan, he couldn't get out of there quickly enough, but this gentleman agreed to stay there. Vet Girl, RWB, thank you for the 1999 super chat for Ukraine and for our men and women of our military holding that border. Absolutely, absolutely. Wherever these dictators and these people like Putin invade countries to consolidate their power, it's really disgusting, and we as a country that loves freedom has to respond to this. And it's pathetic. Right on the screen right now, that's the boxer from Ukraine, Klitschko. There were two brothers, Waldemir and Vladimir Klitschko, and one of them is the mayor, I believe, of Kyiv. And these guys are tough. They're tough dudes. Russians I consider Ukrainians Russians. They have a different blood flowing through their veins. They are tough people. They've dealt with a lot of adversity throughout their lives. Right here is Miss Ukraine. Not only is she beautiful, but she's willing to pick up a weapon and help defend her country. So it's and Zelensky, of course, says we will fight for our country. How amazing is that? A politician ready to stand behind and fight for his country. Just an incredible thing. Folks, this is Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. In the last couple of days, we've been covering this story, even though it's not specifically a crime story. It's a story that affects all of us. And I think we all have to be aware of it and to see how not only does it affect Europe and it affects Ukraine, it affects the whole world. We all look at, we've already been paying ridiculously high prices for oil and gasoline. And this certainly is not going to help that. I believe it's going to inflate the prices even more. When Russia asked today for a a peace sit down in Belarus, I just, I couldn't help but thinking it's just who's going to be at this meeting? Are they going to have any Russian heavyweights, or is it just a ploy maybe to get people from the Ukraine to sit down there and believe there's any hope to negotiate anything with the Russians who invaded their country? So let's see if anything comes out of these peace talks. Someone put in the chat before that the United Nations, of course, condemned the Russian invasion, but the United Nations, it really doesn't have much power. I guess it's good to have it in New York in the United States so we know what these other countries are doing, but they really don't have a lot of power. And as a result, are they anyone gonna sit down at the UN? How do you, if you're Russia, how do you negotiate a peace deal after you just invaded? You invaded the Ukraine. 2 days, 2 cents. We should all fight for our countries, and if a person won't, then they should find a new country. I was so proud to hear the Ukraine people stand up. 2 days, 2 cents. You are 100% right. People that have everything to lose and they stand up for their country. It's an incredible thing. It's just it's something that we hopefully we haven't experienced in this country. I said the other day the closest we got to being attacked and having foreign people on our grounds was 9/11, where 2 commercial jets were used to take out the symbols of capitalism. Of course, the Twin Towers, the World Trade Center. But just think of what it would be like if another country invaded our country. And, people used to say, oh, that could never happen. Well, we experienced 9/11 and no one ever thought that that could happen. And that, in fact, happened. So we can't be so cocky as Americans anymore to say that it could never happen. It absolutely could happen, and we have to be prepared.
Vladimir Putin drastically escalated this conflict overnight when he ordered nuclear deterrent forces on high alert. So this means the country's nuclear weapons are prepared for increased readiness to launch. Russia, like the U.S. and NATO allies, has thousands of nuclear warheads that it maintains as a deterrent to an attack. It was a relatively quiet night in Ukraine's capital city. The Russian military offered to let people leave today as it prepares for an onslaught. The UN just released an update saying more than 500,000 people have gotten out of the country so far, and many of them are women and children. 5 days after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the destruction can be seen just about everywhere, from burned out military vehicles to buildings just ripped apart by missile attacks. Ukraine's president making it clear that today's meeting will not include any talks of surrender.
Meanwhile, world leaders are taking unprecedented action against Russia. All of the EU and England closing their airspace to Russian commercial flights and sending military help to Ukraine. U.S. lawmakers returning to Capitol Hill this week are pushing for a bipartisan effort to deliver a nearly $6.5 billion aid package. And everyday people are looking for ways that they can help. Right now on 11alive.com, we have a list of 3 ways you can support the cause, supported by Ukrainian advocates here in Metro Atlanta.
Folks, it's amazing when you get around and you talk to people how many Ukrainians there are in the United States and how many people have family members in the Ukraine and how worried they are for their family members in this attack by the Soviet Union. It's really quite scary, and you just think of it. You pray for these people that they get out and for their safety, but it's really, it's really a scary thing. And when they talk about sanctions, Germany, I believe, had one of the hardest things because they get their oil from Russia, and for them to sanction Russia, that's going to cost them a great deal in pain and political pain, and it's just a really a scary thing for them. And we can sanction, and the sanctions also obviously have an effect on our economy, since this is a global economy, a world economy, and all of these things affect all of us, and they affect the world, they affect the global economy, but if you're in Europe and if you're in Ukraine, and there's the Ukrainian flag, there are a lot of national pride for Ukrainians in defending their country. Um, you have to understand what it would be like to be invaded, and again, civilian targets being hit. As of uh, the 22nd, when the invasion began, 350 civilians have been killed so far. You know, and it's really a horrendous thing. Um, Folks, if you're not subscribed to Police Off the Cuff, please go on our YouTube, hit that subscribe button, give us the thumbs up, join our Patreon, and also if you want to become part of the Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories family, join our YouTube family, and you'll be in the chat with the green font. That's how we can tell who you are, and I really appreciate you guys. Tomorrow night at 9 p.m., I have two women who have a podcast called Ivy League Murders. And it's a really interesting podcast. And they had contacted me, and I had agreed to put them on the show. And I think it's going to be really exciting to have them on the show. So tomorrow night at 9 p.m., Laura Rodriguez McDonald, she's related to, I believe her husband is related to the late NYPD Sergeant Stephen McDonald, who died a few years ago from a shooting when he was shot. I believe it was almost 30 years before within Central Park. So she's one of the podcasters, and we're having them on tomorrow night, and it's called Ivy League Murders. Should be pretty exciting. I'm looking forward to it. Arafil Islam, hello, how are you? Alicia B, I remember in the early 80s when I was in college and we were all concerned about nukes and first strike capability. This is feeling far too familiar what is happening now. Yeah, you think that we wouldn't have to worry about this in our lifetime, but Jesse, NR, I hope not. Yeah, I certainly hope not also. So, we're going to keep an eye on this story. I think it's obviously a global story. It's a story that's going to affect everyone. It's going to affect the economy. It's going to affect the U.S. I think is just approving $1 billion in aid to in aid to Ukraine to help the Ukrainians, and that's obviously militarily, and help them out with food and that type of thing. And it's good that we're getting right on top of this, because these folks will have no way to obtain weaponry, water, food, goods like that.
Capital, Kyiv, the mayor said this morning there was no Russian presence in the city. After massive explosions overnight near Kyiv, citizens there remain under curfew. And Ukraine says it intercepted a cruise missile from Belarus headed toward the capital. CNN is reporting that according to two senior U.S. officials, Russians have encountered, quote, stiffer than expected resistance from the Ukrainians. Late Saturday, the United States and Europe announced far-reaching new financial punishments against Russia designed to cripple the Russian economy, removing several Russian banks from the global financial system known as SWIFT. U.S. and European officials also committed to sanctioning the Russian central bank. That's according to people familiar with the move. And that move would be without precedent for an economy of Russia's size. We are starting to get a sense of the human cost of this war. According to the UN, there have been at least 240 civilian casualties, including at least 64 deaths since Russia launched its attack. And there are now 368,000 Ukrainian refugees. I want to go straight to the ground in Ukraine and begin with CNN chief international correspondent Clarissa Warr, who is live in Kyiv. Clarissa, Ukrainians are fighting to repel Russian troops in its major cities. What are you hearing and seeing about the latest efforts?
So there have been quite a lot of activity this morning, a lot of explosions, mostly in the distance. That has gone very quiet in the last 20 minutes or so. And it's unclear if that might be related to the news that you just mentioned, which is a big deal. Essentially, Ukraine agreeing to send a delegation to the Belarusian border near the Pripyat River to meet with a Russian delegation to presumably start negotiations to try to see if there is a way out of this disastrous war. Now, earlier in the day, President Volodymyr Zelensky had agreed in principle to negotiations, but had said that they would not agree to them in Belarus or near the Belarusian border because, needless to say, Belarus is not neutral territory here. This is where all of a huge amount of Russia's troops are actually pushing in from. Now, the Ukrainians put out a statement on their Facebook page where they said, on President Zelensky's Facebook page, where they said the politicians have agreed that the Ukrainian delegation will meet with the Russian delegation without preconditions near the Pripyat River. Alexander Lukashenko, that's the leader of Belarus, has taken responsibility for ensuring that all planes, helicopters, and missiles stationed on the Belarusian territory will remain on the ground during the Ukrainian delegation's travel, meeting, and return. So essentially saying there, Dana, that they have extracted a sort of guarantee of security from President Lukashenko that this Ukrainian delegation will be safe when they travel to go and meet with this Russian delegation. Meanwhile, though, the situation on the ground has been a sort of continuous barrage from the Russian side, but they have definitely been finding themselves encountering much stiffer resistance. As you mentioned, that's according to U.S. intelligence sources, but also, frankly, just what we're seeing on the ground. The expectation had been that a city like Kyiv would fall in 1 to 4 days. We're now on day 4. The Ukrainians are saying that they thwarted the advance of a column of Russian tanks in the western part of the city. And while we did hear a lot of explosions last night, one particularly loud one that appeared to target a fuel depot, it is now at this hour. Earlier, it was still pretty noisy, but now it does seem to be a bit quieter. And again, that may be because every side is waiting to see what, if anything, transpires from these negotiations. Although I should say that as of now, we don't yet have a timing on when they might begin. Dana?
Yeah, Clarissa, we're going to talk a lot more about that announcement about talks, which is, as you said, huge, with our guests coming up. But because you are on the ground and you have been doing such important, amazing reporting, can you just talk about the human element that you have?
Well, obviously, folks, the reporter was going to talk about the human tragedy, the folks having to flee the country. Many who choose to stay have to stay in underground garages, subway stations, just to avoid the shelling and the bombing. It's heartbreaking to see young children, crying on the street without food, without water. And this is the real, and, just try, when they talk about trying to flee the country, there's no gasoline, and there's huge lines, cars that do have gas. There's huge lines to get out of the country because everyone is trying to flee at the same time. So the other problem, and Marie Green just brought up, and this is, thank you for bringing this up. Is it just me, or is there no mention of the virus? Where's it gone? Yes, the virus is still a big problem in Ukraine, and they're not really mentioning that right now, but they weren't out of the woods in regards to the virus. So, Marie Green, thank you very much for bringing that up. The humanitarian loss from this is going to be unbelievable. And hopefully, I can't see Putin backing down, because he's one of those, just savage dictators that will go down as being as bad as some of the worst we've known throughout history. So the human toll is something that we all have to be concerned with. If you want to go on the internet, there's places that you can donate money. And hopefully it gets to the right places, to the right people. As I said, the United States is giving $1 billion in aid to the Ukrainians. So, folks, I'm going to continue to follow this story. It's a little bit off, out of our lane, out of the crime business, out of the police off the cuff business. But it's such an important story that I think we need to still stay with it. And maybe every other day, every 2 or 3 days, I'll get back to the story. Lieutenant Pete Pranzo, thanks for your continued support. Michelina Serino, Sierra J, Candelise Rice said on news that Putin has gone off the deep end. He's acting deranged. Be kind. Someone needs to put Putin in his place. Yes, absolutely. Marlene Barone, some officials wonder if he's lost his marbles. Yeah, I love the expressions you guys are using. It's so great. John Arbert, thank you. He says, I love the different news stories. Thank you. I'm trying to be as eclectic as I can. However, as my expertise is crime and investigation, but this is a really important story. Folks, so anyway, thank you so much for coming by today, for listening. As I said, I'm going to try to come back and do this story again. But for now, I think that I'm going to say goodbye and have a wonderful day. And folks, stay safe. And as I said, we'll continue to watch this story. On behalf of Police Off the Cuff, I'm Bill Cannon. Thank you so much for watching.